Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for our webinar. Please complete the poll and let us know your role in education as you are joining. For those of you just logging in, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Complete the poll, please, and let us know your role in education. All right, we'll begin with some introductions. Hello, everyone. My name is Jay Adams. I'm the Managing Director of Quality Reviews at SchoolWorks, and I'm based out of Nashville, Tennessee. I will be your host for today, and I have some client friends that are joining me, and I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves in just a moment. However, for those of you that may not be familiar with SchoolWorks, SchoolWorks is an educational consulting firm that's based out of Massachusetts. However, we engage with clients all across the U.S. We have 6 main service areas that are centered around supporting effective education practices, which are accountability and authorizer supports, quality reviews, leadership supports, instructional supports, and school developer supports, as well as trainings. Today, I have some friends from Framingham Public Schools with me, Dr. Bob Tremblay, Miss Amy Bright, and Miss Mary Beth O'Brien. I would like for each one of them to begin by introducing themselves and telling us how long they've worked with Framingham Public Schools. Dr. Tremblay, kick us off.
Great. Thanks, Jay. Bob Tremblay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the superintendent of Framingham Public Schools. I joined the team here in 2017, and so I'm in my 7th full year in Framingham. And I'm joined by my colleagues here. I don't know when we introduce them, as we have them introduce themselves.
Yes, they can introduce themselves. Yes.
Go ahead. Hi, I'm Mary Beth O'Brien. I'm currently the Director of Curriculum, Instruction, and Assessment here in Framingham. It's actually, I've been here for about 1.5 years now. I joined the team last year as a principal and this year in this new role.
I'm Amy Bright. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Pre-K through 12. I have been in the district since 2014 when I joined as a principal, and then moved into a central office role, I think officially in 2017.
Wonderful. Thank you all for those introductions. Let's kind of get into it. So you all just stated how long you've been in your roles in Framingham. So you touched down, Dr. Tremblay, you're the new superintendent, you're touring schools, you're meeting people, you're trying to figure out what's going on. What are some things that jumped out at you, and how did you approach the development of your new district level strategic plan?
Yeah, Jay, thanks for the question. I'm really thinking of this in sort of two phases. The phase one is I had the unique opportunity to start in April of 2017. So be like the last few months of the school year. And so the first thing to do was to try to gather whatever evidence I could of a strategic plan or of some sort of forward-looking plan. Beyond the capital plan, there wasn't much instructionally that we had in front of us. And so I was trying to pull together what direction the district had been trying to move in, and looking at budgets and how we were funding, personnel and how we were funding initiatives, and identifying some pretty wide disparities in how funding was being given across schools. And so I began this effort called Superintendent Residencies. And I started that. I took the advantage of those months while I was in the district first and spent a week at every school, getting to learn the culture, seeing what the day in the life looked like, working with, just being, in classes, working with the principals. And then that led me to an initial plan to come out and sort of get us set for the first few years in the district. There's a lot that comes with that in terms of building equity-based budgeting, and we made a lot of shifts programmatically and organizationally. This most recent iteration, though, of the strategic plan is much more remarkable in that we had some years to grow. You'll recall the pandemic also played a role in that as well. So even though our strategic efforts were underway, the pandemic set us back, arguably years. And now we're in year one of a new 7-year plan. It starts in 2023 to 2030. that includes everything from building a new Southside school to improve equity across the district in terms of availability of instructional space, to reducing the capacity, reducing busing across the district, to having comparable programming in all of our schools that makes every school in Framingham desirable and not having to have this sort of complicated inter-school choice model. So that's a lot around the frame of what this plan was, but it's driven by an equity-based model. It is centralized to some extent a lot of the staffing and the resources to make sure that we can allocate using a funding formula to make sure that if a student has general education needs and special education needs and is a multilingual learner, that they're provided those sort of 3 tiers of added financial support and not just giving everybody the sort of the same ration as had been the practice previously. So those are just some examples of how we sort of put this together. I'm happy to speak in more detail about questions you may have or if about getting input from stakeholder voice. But that's the overall guiding structure of walking into a district and saying, what next?
Yeah, no, so I'm glad that you brought up stakeholder voice. I know that everyone at Framingham has really taken a holistic approach. So talk a little bit more about that stakeholder voice. What did that entail? Who was involved? Who are the stakeholders? What did you learn from them about what needed to be included in this new development of the plan?
There's a lot of opinions, as you can imagine, about what education should do. I mean, everybody can be self-proclaimed expert in education because most of us have gone and had some school experience and go back and, well, when I was in school, this is how it was. And so for us, it was really trying to take a good hard look at what voices do we need to bring to the table and how do we center the student experience in all of this. And as we developed the plan, even initially with talking to our leadership team, we were using really complex language that was really educational jargon that's really not practical for most in our community. You think about Framingham community, I would express it as a level of gratitude, right? There's a feeling of we trust the schools to do right by our children, and with that comes an expectation that we deliver on that expectation, right? There's on that expectation of the parents, that is. And so for us, it was having clear language that says, this is what we center. And what we found was missing, and it was an interesting discovery that happened at the senior leadership team level, was the absence of the word student in our priorities. And even though I think we took for granted that we're in education, we're a school, of course it's about kids. But until we started saying we're doing this for all students or creating these opportunities and pathways for all students, it changed the game for us. As simple as it may seem, to really be minded on what are we actually doing and why are we doing the work that we're doing every day. So that was really important. But some of the interesting conversations were with some of our senior members of our community, going to the Council on Aging as an example, and hearing, talking to grandparents. I was having these meetings myself and talking to grandparents about what is it they imagine their hopes and dreams for their grandchild. Right, that was a very different perspective than talking to an educator on what do they see as the need in their classroom. So you sort of put all those parts together, and what's the school committee's vision? What's the city council's vision of what education does? How do we show return on investment when we have our budgeting? And so you take all those different lenses and you put that back together. And what really came of this was 3 overarching strategic priorities, and I'll simplify them. One, and the top one, and not surprisingly, the most important, is high academic achievement expectations for all students, right? So we've centered, for the first time, probably in Framingham's long history, of centering high quality educational experiences for all students. And so that's a push. That's a lot of complexities within that, as I'm sure my colleagues will describe. Second to that was having a sense of belonging, because we know that whether we call it diversity or equity, what it feels like when you walk into a room, if you're a student of color and you see only white educators in spaces, do you feel like you belong there, right? So for us, diversifying our workforce is a function of belonging. Or when you walk into a room and you feel like, our teachers in the hallway sort of, engaging with students, or are they, not engaging with kids, right? And how do you feel? So we're trying to encourage that belonging across the district. We've had a very successful partnership with our Framingham Teachers Association, our union, on this effort, and reaching into homes as well, reaching out into households to have parents as partners, to have teachers connecting with families in powerful ways. And so there's a lot of input that came, and also from students. I had chances to talk with kids at student council meetings, at grade level meetings, at the high school. I think some of the classes, we had an auditorium full, and I was asking about their futures. What do you want your school to provide for you? What are we not doing we can do better? And so this plan now represents all of those voices. We also did surveys for people who wanted to offer that. And my last point on this would be, in addition to that, I've asked each department over this 7-year plan to build out their own specific strategic plan to those department-related priorities. Of course, teaching and learning being one major element of that, but finance and operations, even fine and performing arts, where do they see this growing? So when you have a 7-year plan, it really keeps you, sort of metaphorically, that's the beacon, right? That's how you steady the water. You have a destination, and I think if without it, you really don't. You're just sort of responding, and that's not always really good guidance on how you build budgets and how you hire staffing. So it's been a good centerpiece for us, and we're excited to be wrapping up soon, year 1 of a 7-year plan.
Wonderful. Thank you. You touched on it a little bit, but I would like for you to dive in a little bit more, and maybe Mary Beth and Amy want to chime in as well, just about I've had the opportunity to visit your schools, and I know that it is a comprehensive approach from every department. So what do some of those subsequent plans of other departments look like as a portion of this 7-year plan that you've built out as a district?
So I can answer that. I
Sure.
think that the one thing that is fantastic that Dr. Tremblay touched upon in creating a proactive approach using a 7-year strategic plan, when you're asked as a department to make your own individual plan that aligns to those 3 established priorities, I think the Office of Teaching and Learning, which is multilingual curriculum instruction and assessment, not fine and performing arts, but the pre-K expansion and the educational technology sphere, we partner with the executive director of student supports and the departments that she oversees, special ed and health and wellness, to take a comprehensive approach of what our 7-year plan is, and it's all coherently designed. And so part of that pre-work to get there, that proactive stance, was to create an instructional framework that we all kind of ground our work in. So the instructional framework had 3 anchors and 4 pillars. We built the framework around brave spaces, high expectations, and having an asset mindset. And then the 4 pillars was that we exist right in a space of collaboration, lesson design, motivation and engagement, and culture of feedback, so that we can get to a place of students feeling as if they matter, as if they belong. Based on that work together, we spent time with our partnership with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, specifically highlighting our first priority, the one around strengthening standards-based grade level instruction to meet the needs of all students, but specifically the work around emergent bilinguals, special education students, and historically marginalized groups of students. And so Mary Beth and the team have worked to create 2 instructional priorities that support the district strategic priority of strengthening standards-based instruction that centers all of our work and the walkthroughs that we do, the conversations we have, the professional development that we lead, opportunities that we are enlisting out of the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to align to that work. So there is nothing that seems as an add-on or an offshoot, and it doesn't really allow you an opportunity to be reactive because you have that long-range planning for the next 7 years. But I'll let Mary Beth add on maybe about our work with the DESE and those 2 priorities.
Sure. So in terms of really aligning the organization through a vertical spine, we have worked very closely with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education on identifying our 2 instructional priorities, but then how that's going to live and breathe in our day-to-day work. So the first one is that all students, especially our students with disabilities and emergent bilingual students, will demonstrate understanding of grade level content through student work that demonstrates learning of research-based, standards-aligned, grade level content provided by our amazing educators. Additionally, the second priority anchored in a lot of those same things, but with a concerted focus on grade level content through academic discourse. And that looks and is facilitated through, again, high quality instruction, but really that academic discourse, both oral and written. So within those 2 frames, we then have to ask ourselves, what does this look like in practice? So this particular year, and as a big component of the Office of Teaching and Learning's priorities is implementing high quality instructional materials. And while that HQIM phrase sounds really buzzy and everybody's using it, we really have to ask ourselves, curriculum matters. So what exactly are we using? What are we giving educators in order to provide them with the tools so that they can do that work? And then how are we following up, providing the professional development and really monitoring the implementation? And we really have taken on an approach to narrow our focus where we are implementing high quality curriculum in literacy at the elementary level in grades K to 5, and really narrowing the scope of that with how are we using these 2 instructional priorities to drive our work, and then how are we really providing the supports in order to make sure that implementation is a success.
Thank you. Can you elaborate a little bit more about how you implemented the instructional plan at each school? Because I know that you all have rolled this out and you've taken great care with that. So how did you get everyone, school leaders, teachers, to buy into the instructional plan and implementing these instructional priorities?
You want to take that?
Yeah, I can take that. So, so I think it's the work that Bob has talked about. I think the more that we are in classrooms and talking with teachers and talking with educators, we're able to direct that or inform that work. And so the use of our instructional leadership teams at each of our buildings was an important place to have these conversations. Additionally, we did some feedback groups around the instructional framework to get feedback and buy-in. The 2 instructional priorities really came out of a deep dive of the analysis of our current data and knowing that we are not having the success that we want to with those 3 groups that I named, the emergent bilingual group, students with disabilities, and historically marginalized. And I think that mirrors the experience in all of our schools, that we can do better, and that educators want to do better, and that we are, I think, blessed to have people who are in this work with us. Bob mentioned our union leadership, our continued partnership with them. So I think this is all in a place of getting as many stakeholders to have voice in the process, and also understanding that there's a 7-year strategic plan that's rooted in research, and this is the way we're going. We also, I mean, to double back to what Bob said about our equity-based approach, you have a zero-based budgeting approach every year. And so we're constantly looking at, like, what is the return on investment of what we're budgeting into? And so we are very fortunate in Framingham. We have multiple coaches in elementary school. We have, a large number of support staff there. And so when you're looking at the people who support teachers in supporting students in a holistic approach, I think that also helps garner the voice of making sure that this rises to the priority.
And as I know we're going to be going to the QA shortly. If I can just build on that one, I want to also make another acknowledgement that we recognize that this work for any educators who may be watching and who may be sharing in, this sort of push of instructional practices and that shift, it can be pretty draining when you couple together the challenges that students are presenting, mental health challenges that we're seeing. And that's not just unique to Framingham, but everywhere. And you have that present in classes, you have in schools, whether it's overcrowding, you're trying to manage more students in spaces with tightening budgets, but also just the demand. We're saying we need to do teaching and learning differently. Right. And then that's a hard, you mentioned buy-in, and that's a hard buy-in, right? Because there may be people who are on board with that and people who may not be. And how do we do that with still celebrating the great educators that we have and sort of gently nudging this direction? But yet at the same time, we're seeing that our students the gap continues to widen. So it's why we've centered our work around students. It's why we've prioritized teaching and learning. But I also want to acknowledge, we'd be remiss in not acknowledging the challenge of implementation with this is that it's a very real impact on our professional educators who have to do business differently than they did yesterday. And that's a big shift to put all that together in 180 days and have that expectation really high. So I just wanted to call that out because I don't want it to be missed. And I certainly it's not missed on this team of 3 here that we recognize that it's not easy lift that we're asking.
Yeah, thank you for pointing out that challenge, Dr. Tremblay. I was going to ask you to point out the challenges, so appreciate that. But let's also talk about a couple of quick wins that you maybe have experienced this year, or even in the development of the plan. What are some quick wins?
I would say I'd lead off first. I'd say one of the overall strategic plan wise, we know if we double down on early childhood, it's going to have long-term impacts that are, and we've had a school committee that's committed to this. We've had city council, our mayor. And so you feel like for how cities can be divided on things, especially when it comes to sort of city and local school politics, there seems to be universal acceptance, understanding, and appreciation for doubling down on creating a space of universal tuition-free pre-K for all 4-year-olds. I think that's going to be the long-time game changer for us. So that's a win because we've already begun to add more than 100 added pre-K seats at no cost to families, particularly for families who've never had a pre-K experience. That's going to really, it kind of thinks back to those who've been in education for a while when we used to have half-day and full-day kindergarten. Some districts may still have that. You saw a definite change when you created the whole full-day experience for students. So the downside with education reform like this is that it doesn't usually pay those dividends for 2 decades later. But you have to leap on faith that a pre-K effort now is going to have that return on investment. So I would just offer that as one of the success stories that we've already seen even in year 1 of a 7-year plan. And the fact that our state has just invited us into an eligibility period to build a new Southside school, which is part of our strategic priority number 3 over these next 7 years, which will create a new space for us to continue to expand our pre-K efforts. So that's one win. I would turn to my colleagues to offer an additional win that they feel they could express.
I think another win is just the coherence of the district in trying to understand, like Bob talked about the feelings of educators. And so if you feel like you're drinking from a fire hose and it's coming from all directions, it can be very overwhelming. And I think that we are trying to center how social emotional learning and academics are paired. And so I would also say that the other win is in elementary, as Mary Beth said, we've moved to a new curriculum, but it's also a new ideology of how to teach reading. And I feel like there could have been we could have been in a place where we were at stop, and everyone has implemented. Everyone, when we do walkthroughs, have gotten to a place where we're at implementation, and now we're at, okay, how do we take implementation with a brand new program and try to build in higher order thinking questions? How do we build in depths of knowledge? How do we look at our tasks and make sure that we're using that as a data-centered approach, since Framingham, especially over the years, has created a very data-centered culture of looking at the data to inform actionable next steps.
Thank you so much for that, Amy. We're moving into kind of our Q&A portion. We have about 5 to 6 minutes left in this webinar, everyone. So if you could submit any questions that you have, but we have a couple that are already in. One of them is about progress monitoring. In what ways or what systems do you have in place to progress monitor what you've already implemented from the plan? Maybe it's those instructional priorities that you spoke about earlier.
So I would say I can start at the sort of the central office level, and then my colleagues can speak about the school level in terms of accountability and progress monitoring. But I would say the message I try to get across with our senior leadership team is we have a structure now that we've rolled this plan out this year. We ask each of our departmental directors or senior leaders to input their progress. When we did this 7-year plan, we also had these leaders design sort of year 1 through 7 sort of slices of the pie, if you will. And so we want to really progress monitor where are we in year 1, with the understanding that budgets will dictate things, circumstances, real life will dictate whether things are abandoned strategically or we move them forward to a different year. And so we're in the process now of doing that. So at each of our senior leadership meetings each week, our senior leaders will offer up where they are. They'll provide a written script. And we ask other senior leaders, I ask other senior leaders to contribute to that as well, because we want to reciprocate how we're supporting one another. If the Fine and Performing Arts Director is trying to expand string programming for all 3rd graders in the school district, how are we supporting that? How is Buildings and Grounds supporting that, right? So every leader has a role in reciprocating that strategic priority because we all built the plan together. So it's not every department for themselves. It's all of us working together for the students based on the year's plans that we thoughtfully have put together. That does trickle down though to, that's the central office level, what happens at the school level. So maybe Amy or Mary Beth want to comment on that.
So I think we've morphed over the years. So we initially started with core key benchmarks at each of our schools around chronic absenteeism, the level of achievement and growth on our diagnostics, moving the needle in very specific areas, referral data, like I said, chronic absenteeism. So as we've continued that work, and it's just become part of the fabric of what we do, last year when we identified the 2 instructional priorities specifically to be centered in elementary K-5 around literacy, we've changed that practice now. We just met with the middle schools this past month. We did a student work protocol looking specifically at student work. We have still have data meetings at each of our elementary schools, middle and high school around common assessments is a direction that we're now moving into. We're looking at what are the results of your iReady diagnostic? What does your chronic absenteeism look like? So we're having those conversations in smaller groups, but we're also partnering with TNTP for our implementation of our new high quality instructional materials in elementary. And I can let Mary Beth talk about what that progress monitoring looks like as well.
Sure. So in terms of going back to that idea of how we have the whole organization focused on the same efforts in order to really see some growth, one of the things that's really been helpful is with our TNTP, the new teacher project, consultants, they're tied to our GLEAN grant, which is the implementation of our literacy initiative. And together with TNTP consultants and district level leaders, as well as principals and instructional coaches, we conduct 3 walkthroughs using a protocol regarding implementation that really narrows in, and it's very much aligned to our instructional priorities. And we cross-check that implementation and then take that data and we look for trends across schools, then share the individual school data with each school as well. Come together in 2 central office bodies. One is our district instructional leadership team, which is composed of the folks here as well as some other senior leaders, coordinators, and then we have what we call a GLEAN leadership instructional team that involves those same district level leaders as well as school-based leaders and coaches, and we go over that data and look for trends. And then from that, what we realized is where in our implementation of the curriculum is something that we can narrow our focus on to really create one instructional focus area, that then the feedback from instructional walkthroughs given to teachers is really aligned to the specific and intentional professional development of our implementation of our literacy program. So what we narrowed our scope to was really ensuring that there are depths of knowledge and high quality questions that are text dependent at grade level and anchored in text in all of our classrooms, and really that the scaffolds and supports are matching the individual learner, so not over scaffolding, really to make sure that students are given every opportunity to think at high levels. So when our feedback is very clearly aligned to what we've intentionally put into place, both with the curriculum as well as the pedagogical principles, we're really making sure that we're seeing shifts in both instructional decisions by educators, but then also student performance, student outcomes, and student experience. So having that really clear alignment, which we're in the process of really implementing that phase now, we're hoping that will help us really see shifts in instruction.
Good. Thank you, Mary Beth. We have just about 45 seconds left, but I want to get to one last question. One of our questions you did answer was about accountability tied to those instructional walkthroughs. So thank you for talking about those components. And one of our last questions, you talked about shifting the ideology of teachers who teach reading. How did that happen? In a few short words, what were some of your strategies in helping teachers create that mindset shift?
I think really what it comes down to is bringing educators together to engage in dialogue around instructional practice, around the new curriculum materials, talk about the shifts in the science of reading, where those lived prior with the curriculum we were using before, and why those shifts have to happen, and then really being intentional around providing the time and the support to develop their muscle around how they implement those shifts in their instructional practice.
Thank you so much for that. Y'all, we are at time. How did that fly by so quickly? I guess we were having a lot of fun talking about this. We apologize we weren't able to get to all of the questions. We will go through those. If there's something that we could send out, we have your contact information. We'll do that if the answers are available. However, you should know that you will have an opportunity to receive a link to the recording of this. We want to thank our guests for joining us today. I appreciate you all stepping in. Hopefully I'll see you soon in Framingham, one of my favorite clients to go visit. They know that, no secrets. But thank you all so much for engaging in this conversation with us. And thank you to all of our guests who took the time out of your busy schedules to log on for this conversation. And we look forward to seeing you all in some of our future webinars. Be on the lookout for those as they will come throughout the year. So thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.